I was supposed to remember my retirement party as the happiest night of my life. Instead, it's the night I realized my own daughter-in-law might have tried to poison me. The music was playing, my coworkers were laughing, and my son Daniel was giving a speech about how proud he was of me. That's when I saw Melissa leaning over my plate. Her hand moved quickly, too quickly, and something small dropped into my food. She looked up immediately, watching my face. I didn't say a word. I just smiled and quietly switched my plate with her mother's. And 20 minutes later, Linda Carter was the one who started collapsing at my retirement party. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment when your instincts screamed that something was wrong, even when everyone else thought everything was fine? If this story pulls you in, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate every one of you listening. And I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are right now. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. All right, let me take you back to the beginning of that night, because what happened before that moment made everything even more disturbing. To understand why that moment at my retirement party felt so chilling, you need to understand what that night meant to me. My name is Susan Garcia, and for 38 years I worked for the Phoenix Unified School District in Arizona. I wasn't a teacher in a classroom, though people often assume that when they heard I worked for the district. My job was behind the scenes. I managed budgets, audited programs, and made sure the numbers added up so schools could keep running. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. Every dollar I tracked meant books in classrooms, lunches for kids, or repairs for aging school buildings. Over time, the district became a second family to me. So when retirement finally came, it wasn't just the end of a job. It was the end of a life chapter. The party was held at a small community event hall not far from downtown Phoenix. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was beautiful in a simple way. White tablecloths covered the round tables, strings of warm lights hung across the ceiling, and a banner stretched across the back wall that read, ***, congratulations, Susan Garcia, 38 years of dedication, ***. I remember walking into the room and feeling overwhelmed by the applause. Teachers I had worked with decades earlier were there. Administrators who had retired years before showed up. Even a few former students, now adults, came to shake my hand and thank me. One young woman hugged me tightly and said, "You probably don't remember me, but you helped save the after-school music program when I was in 7th grade. That program changed my life." Moments like that made every stressful audit and every late night worth it. But what made the evening even more meaningful was that my son, Daniel, had helped organize the event. Daniel was 36 now, tall like his father had been, with dark hair and the same stubborn jawline I used to tease him about when he was little. Raising Daniel after my husband passed away had been the hardest thing I ever did. My husband, Miguel, died when Daniel was only 10. After that, it was just the two of us. I worked full-time, managed the house, helped with homework, drove him to soccer practice, and somehow still found the energy to show up at every school play and every parent meeting. Daniel used to tell people his mom was stronger than Superman. Hearing that used to make me laugh. But the truth is, I did everything I could to give him a good life. So seeing him stand near the stage that night, smiling proudly, should have made me feel nothing but happiness. And for a while it did. Beside him stood his wife, Melissa. Melissa Garcia had been part of our family for almost 4 years. When Daniel first introduced her to me, she seemed charming. She was confident, well-spoken, and worked in real estate. She had this way of walking into a room and immediately taking control of the conversation. At first, I admired that about her. She always knew exactly what to say. But over the past year, something about her had started to make me uncomfortable. I couldn't explain it at first. There was nothing obvious, no fights, no shouting matches, nothing dramatic. Just small things, little comments, questions that felt a little too personal. The first time I noticed it was about 8 months before the retirement party. Melissa had come over for Sunday dinner with Daniel and their daughter Emily. Emily was my 8-year-old granddaughter and the absolute light of my life. She had curly dark hair like Daniel and a laugh that filled the entire house. While Emily played with her toys in the living room, Melissa sat at the kitchen table with me while I finished washing dishes. "So Susan," she said casually, "what happens to your pension after you retire?" I dried my hands and shrugged. "Well, it's pretty straightforward. The district pays me monthly. It's enough for me to live comfortably." Melissa nodded thoughtfully. That's nice, and your house, is it paid off? I remember pausing for a second. Yes, I said slowly. It's been paid off for years. She smiled. That's amazing. Honestly, you're in a better financial position than most people your age. The comment sounded like a compliment, but something about the way she said it felt calculated. I brushed the feeling aside. People talk about money sometimes. It didn't have to mean anything. But then the questions kept coming over the following months. Melissa asked about my savings. She asked if I had a will. She asked who would manage my finances if something happened to me. At first, I laughed it off. Hopefully nothing happens to me anytime soon, I joked once. But Melissa didn't laugh. She leaned forward and said, you'd be surprised how quickly things can change when people get older. The words stuck with me longer than I expected. Then there were the comments she made about my memory. Small things. If I misplaced my reading glasses, she would say lightly, see. This is why it's good to plan ahead for when memory starts slipping. If I forgot the name of a restaurant, she would chuckle and say, totally normal at your age. At first I thought she was joking, but after a while I noticed something unsettling. She always made those comments when Daniel was nearby. One evening, about 3 months before my retirement, I overheard Daniel repeating something she had said. She just worries about you, he told me gently. Melissa says memory issues can sneak up on people. I remember staring at him surprised. Daniel, I manage multi-million-dollar school budgets every day, I said. I think my brain is doing just fine. He laughed awkwardly, but I could see the seed of doubt had already been planted. That's when the uneasy feeling inside me started to grow. Another strange moment happened about 2 months later. Melissa came over unexpectedly one afternoon while Daniel was at work. I was in the neighborhood, she said brightly, holding a coffee in one hand. Thought I'd stop by. She offered to help organize some paperwork in my home office. I didn't think much of it at first. But while we were sorting through folders, she kept lingering on certain documents, bank statements, property records, insurance policies. At one point, she picked up a folder and asked casually, do you keep copies of all your financial records here? I looked at her. Yes, why? She shrugged. Oh, no reason. Just thinking about how easy it would be for someone to help manage things if you ever needed assistance. That sentence made my stomach tighten. Not long after that visit, something happened that truly unsettled me. One evening, Daniel and Melissa were at my house for dinner again. After we finished eating, Melissa stepped outside to take a phone call on the patio. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the kitchen window was open and her voice carried inside. I heard her say something that made my blood run cold. Yeah, she said quietly. We're almost there. We just need one clean incident. There was a pause. Then she added, after that, it'll be easy. I froze where I stood. My heart began to pound in my chest. A clean incident. What did that mean? At the time, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe she was talking about work. Maybe I misunderstood. But deep down, something inside me started whispering a warning. And by the time my retirement party arrived, that whisper had grown into something much louder. I just didn't know yet how dangerous that warning truly was. After I overheard Melissa say asterisk, we just need one clean incident asterisk, I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. People say strange things on the phone all the time. It could have been about a real estate deal. It could have been about paperwork at her office. It could have been anything. But something about the way she said it stayed with me. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the tone. Quiet, careful, almost strategic. For days afterward, I kept replaying that moment in my mind while trying to focus on work. I was still finishing my final months at the school district, wrapping up audits and preparing transition notes for the person who would replace me. Normally, numbers were my safe place. Numbers behaved logically. They followed rules. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Melissa. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. For example, she began offering to help me more often. At first, the offers sounded thoughtful. One Saturday afternoon, she showed up at my house carrying a folder and 2 coffees. I thought we could spend some time organizing your important documents, she said cheerfully. You know, just to make things easier once you retire. I raised an eyebrow. My documents are already organized, I told her. She laughed lightly like I had made a joke. Oh, I'm sure they are. I just mean putting everything in one place, insurance papers, medical records, financial information. That way, if anything ever happens, Daniel and I could help quickly. The way she said asterisk, Daniel and I asterisk, made something inside my chest tighten. I appreciate the concern, I said carefully, but I've handled my own paperwork for decades. Melissa smiled again, but there was something forced about it. Of course, she said. You're very independent. That word independent kept coming up. It was almost like she was testing how attached I was to that idea. Another strange moment happened a few weeks later. Daniel and Melissa invited me to dinner at their house. Their daughter Emily ran to the door when I arrived, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Grandma," she shouted happily. Holding that little girl always made the world feel simpler. We sat down for dinner, grilled chicken salad and mashed potatoes. Everything looked lovely, and Melissa had clearly put effort into the meal. Halfway through dinner, Melissa suddenly said, "Susan, do you ever worry about living alone?" The question came out of nowhere. I looked up from my plate. "Not really," I said. "Why would I?" She exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Well," she said carefully, "a lot of people your age eventually move closer to family or into smaller places. It's just safer." Daniel nodded. "Melissa's right, Mom. We've talked about it before." I felt a flicker of irritation. "I'm 64, I said calmly. "Not 94. Melissa chuckled, but it sounded rehearsed. "Of course. We just mean planning ahead." Then she added something that made the entire table go quiet. "You know, sometimes cognitive decline can happen very suddenly." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I stared at her. "Are you suggesting I'm declining?" I asked. "Oh, no, Melissa said, quickly raising her hands. "Not at all. I just mean it's smart to prepare." Daniel cleared his throat. "Melissa just worries," he said. "She reads a lot about elder care." Elder care. The phrase hung in the air like a storm cloud. I forced a smile and changed the subject, but the conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. Later that evening, after dinner was finished, Melissa asked if she could use the bathroom upstairs. While she was gone, Daniel leaned toward me. "You know she means well, right?" he said quietly. I studied his face. "Daniel," I said slowly, "has Melissa been telling you that I'm having memory problems?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "She just mentioned you've been forgetting little things," he said carefully. My stomach tightened. "Like what?" He frowned, thinking. "She said you forgot to send an email once, and that you misplaced some documents." I let out a slow breath. "Daniel, everyone forgets things occasionally. That doesn't mean something is wrong with them." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm just saying she notices things." That phrase bothered me deeply. Asterisk. She notices things. After that dinner, I started paying closer attention whenever Melissa visited. I began noticing patterns. She always asked about my finances. She often suggested ways to simplify my life. And she repeatedly made small comments about my memory whenever Daniel was nearby. One afternoon, about 6 weeks before my retirement, she stopped by again. This time, she brought Emily with her. While Emily played with her coloring books in the living room, Melissa sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You must be excited about retirement," she said. "I am," I replied, "though I'll probably miss the routine." She nodded. "You know," she said slowly, "a lot of retirees eventually let family help manage things. Bills, accounts, stuff like that." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been managing budgets larger than most small businesses for decades." Melissa smiled sweetly. "Of course. But sometimes it's nice to share the responsibility." I could feel something shifting beneath the surface of that conversation. Then she said something that made my chest tighten again. "Have you ever thought about assigning someone power of attorney?" The room suddenly felt very quiet. "That's something people usually do when they expect to lose control of their own decisions," I said. Melissa leaned back slightly. "It's just a safety measure." I studied her face. For the first time, I noticed how carefully she watched my reactions. Almost like she was studying me, testing me. Later that evening, after she and Emily left, I sat alone in my living room thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. Melissa's questions, her comments about my memory, her interest in my finances, and the phrase I had overheard on the phone. Asterisk, "We just need one clean incident." A chill ran through me. I wasn't someone who jumped to wild conclusions. My entire career had been built on careful analysis and evidence, but something inside me was beginning to connect the dots. What if Melissa wasn't just making casual conversation? What if she was slowly building a narrative that suggested I was becoming forgetful, confused, unreliable? If enough people believed that story, it could have serious consequences. People could question my ability to make decisions, to manage my finances, to live independently. The thought made my stomach twist. I tried to shake the feeling away. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was letting a few awkward conversations get inside my head. but deep down a quiet voice kept whispering the same warning. Asterisk, pay attention. And when the night of my retirement party finally arrived, that voice would turn out to be the only thing that saved me. By the time my retirement party arrived, I had already spent weeks trying to convince myself that my worries about Melissa were exaggerated. After all, she was my daughter-in-law, the woman my son loved, the mother of my granddaughter. Surely I couldn't believe she was plotting something against me. Still, the uneasy feeling never fully went away. That evening in Phoenix was warm even for early spring. The sun had just set, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of orange and purple as guests began arriving at the community event hall. Inside, everything looked festive. Round tables filled the room, decorated with small vases of white flowers. Strings of warm lights hung from the ceiling beams, giving the hall a cozy glow. A buffet table stretched along one wall, filled with trays of food and desserts that coworkers had helped arrange. As soon as I walked in, applause broke out. Someone handed me a glass of sparkling cider. Another person hugged me. Someone else joked that now I could finally sleep past 6 in the morning. For a while, I forgot all about my concerns. I laughed with teachers who told stories about chaotic field trips. I listened as a former principal thanked me for saving the district thousands of dollars over the years. I even danced once when an old favorite song came on. For those moments, everything felt normal. Daniel arrived about 20 minutes after I did. He walked straight toward me with that familiar grin I had seen since he was a boy. "Mommy said, pulling me into a hug, 'This place looks great, right?' 'It does,' I said, smiling. 'You helped organize all this.' He shrugged modestly. 'Melissa did most of it.' As if summoned by her name, Melissa appeared beside him a moment later. She looked elegant that night, wearing a fitted navy dress and silver earrings that caught the light as she moved. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who always knew exactly how she appeared to others. "Susan," she said, brightly wrapping her arms around me, "tonight is all about you." Her voice sounded warm. Her smile looked genuine, but something in my chest tightened anyway. Maybe it was just the memory of those strange conversations. Maybe it was the way she held the hug a second longer than usual, as if measuring my reaction. I pushed the thought aside. "Thank you for helping put this together," I said. "You deserve it," she replied smoothly. A few minutes later, someone tapped a glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. Daniel stepped onto the small stage near the front of the hall. I felt a lump rise in my throat as he began speaking. "My mommy said looking around the room has spent almost 4 decades making sure thousands of students had the resources they needed." People nodded and murmured in agreement. "She worked long hours, she sacrificed a lot, and she never once complained." His voice softened. "When my dad passed away, she didn't just keep our family together. She somehow made everything feel normal again." Hearing that nearly broke me. I pressed a napkin to my eyes while the room erupted in applause. For a moment, all I felt was pride. Then Melissa stepped forward beside Daniel. "I'd like to add something," she said. Her tone was polished and confident, the kind of voice that carried easily across a room. "Susan has always been incredibly strong," she said. "But one thing people don't always talk about is how important it is to have support as we get older." The words made my stomach tighten slightly. She continued speaking before I could process the feeling. "My own mother taught me that families should always look out for each other," Melissa said, "especially when life changes like retirement." A few guests nodded politely, which is why she added, "I'm so glad my mom could be here tonight." As if on cue, a woman near the buffet table lifted her hand with a cheerful wave. Linda Carter, Melissa's mother. Linda had a presence that was hard to ignore. She was in her late 60s, but dressed with the same sharp style as her daughter. Her blonde hair was perfectly curled, and she wore a bright red jacket that stood out against the softer colors in the room. I had met Linda several times before, but she had begun appearing around our lives more frequently over the past year. And every time we spoke, she seemed very interested in the same topics Melissa asked about. My house, my finances, my plans for retirement. Linda walked toward me now with a wide smile. "Susan," she said warmly, "congratulations on such a wonderful career." "Thank you," I replied politely. She leaned closer as if sharing a secret. "You must feel relieved knowing you can finally slow down." "I'm looking forward to having more time," I said. Linda nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, but retirement can also be complicated." I tilted my head slightly. How so? Well, she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound confidential. Many people struggle with the transition. New routines, health changes, financial decisions. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Melissa. That's why it's so important to have family guiding things. Something about the phrase guiding things made my chest tighten again. I've managed my own life pretty well so far, I said evenly. Linda laughed lightly. Oh, of course. But everyone needs help eventually. Before I could respond, someone called out from across the room asking for another toast. The conversation ended there, but the unease lingered. Throughout the evening, I noticed Linda moving around the room in a way that felt deliberate. She chatted with several of my coworkers. She asked people questions about my job. At one point, I even overheard her say something that made me pause. Susan has always worked so hard, Linda told one guest. But retirement can be confusing for people. Confusing. There was that theme again. I started to feel like I was watching pieces of a puzzle being arranged around me. Later, as the buffet opened, guests began lining up for food. Melissa stood near the table helping people fill their plates. When it was my turn, she handed me a plate with a bright smile. Make sure you try the salmon, she said. It's amazing. Thank you, I replied. I moved toward one of the tables near the center of the room and sat down while conversations buzzed around me. Daniel was still talking with a group of coworkers near the stage. Linda was chatting with two teachers near the dessert table. For a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal again. I picked up my fork and glanced down at my plate. And that's when Melissa approached from behind me. I didn't notice her right away. But a second later, I saw something in the reflection of the silver serving spoon resting on the table. A hand, Melissa's hand, moving quickly over my plate. I watched frozen as something small dropped into the food. Then she stepped back. And when I turned my head, she was looking directly at my face. Waiting, watching. And suddenly, every strange conversation, every suspicious comment, every warning my instincts had whispered over the past months crashed together in my mind. Something was very, very wrong. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on my plate while the noise of the party buzzed around me. Laughter, clinking glasses, music playing softly in the background. But everything sounded distant, like I was underwater. Melissa had just dropped something into my food. I was certain of it. The movement had been fast, almost practiced. If I hadn't caught the reflection in that spoon, I might never have noticed at all. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked at her. She was standing just behind my chair, smiling. But it wasn't the warm, friendly smile she had used earlier during Daniel's speech. This one felt different, tighter, controlled. Her eyes were studying my face carefully, as if waiting to see whether I had noticed anything. I forced myself to smile back. Everything okay? She asked lightly. Her voice sounded perfectly normal, almost too normal. Yes, I said, keeping my tone calm, just taking a moment to breathe. She nodded, but her eyes flicked briefly toward my plate, then back to my face. The message was clear. She was waiting for me to eat. My heart began pounding harder. A dozen thoughts raced through my mind all at once. Should I confront her right now? Should I stand up and call attention to what I had seen? But another thought stopped me. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood the movement? Accusing someone publicly, especially at a party celebrating my retirement, could create a scene that would follow me for the rest of my life. And Melissa knew that. That realization made something inside me go cold. She had chosen this moment carefully. A crowded room, a celebration, witnesses everywhere. If I reacted emotionally, it could make me look unstable, forgetful, confused. The same narrative she had been quietly building for months. My eyes drifted back down to the plate. The food looked completely normal. Salmon, rice, a small portion of vegetables. Nothing out of place. But the feeling in my stomach told me everything I needed to know. Don't eat it. The voice in my head was calm and firm. Don't eat it. At that moment, someone across the room shouted, "Time for another toast." Several guests stood up, raising their glasses. Daniel walked back toward the center of the room with a microphone, smiling broadly. "All right, everyone," he said, "one more toast before dessert." The crowd turned their attention toward him. Conversations quieted. For the first time since Melissa had approached my table, she glanced away from me. Her focus shifted to Daniel, and that was when an idea slipped into my mind. A risky idea. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If Melissa had put something into my food, then she clearly expected *me* to eat it. She was watching for my reaction. But what would happen if someone else ate it instead? Slowly, carefully, I looked around the room. Most of the guests were standing facing Daniel as he began speaking again. But one person had just walked over toward my table, Linda Carter, Melissa's mother. She carried a glass of wine and looked pleased with herself, like she was enjoying the attention of the evening. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. "Not at all," I said calmly. She pulled out the chair beside me and settled down. "You must feel proud tonight," she said, lifting her glass slightly. "I do," I replied. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa glance toward our table. Her eyes landed on my plate, then back to my hands. Still waiting, still watching. I could feel the tension building inside my chest. But outwardly, I kept my movements slow and relaxed. Linda leaned closer. "You know," she said, lowering her voice slightly, "retirement can be a big adjustment." I gave a small smile. "So I've heard," she chuckled. "But it helps to have family guiding you through the transition." There was that phrase again, guiding you. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. But then I did something that would change everything. While the entire room was focused on Daniel's speech, I gently slid my plate across the table. And at the same time, I nudged Linda's plate toward my seat. The movement was subtle, quiet, hidden behind the table's centerpiece and the distraction of Daniel's toast. Linda didn't notice. She was still looking toward the stage, listening to Daniel talk about childhood memories and embarrassing stories. The switch took less than 3 seconds. When it was done, my original plate, the one Melissa had touched, now sat directly in front of Linda, and her untouched plate sat in front of me. I kept my breathing steady. No sudden movements. No nervous glances. Across the room, Melissa was watching again. Her eyes flicked to the table, to the plates, then to my face. For a split second, something like confusion crossed her expression. Maybe she thought she had misremembered where my plate had been. Maybe she assumed she simply couldn't see clearly from where she stood. But she didn't say anything. Daniel finished his speech to loud applause. Everyone lifted their glasses again. "To Susan," someone shouted. "To Susan," the crowd echoed. As the noise of celebration filled the room again, Linda picked up her fork. I watched quietly. My pulse thudded in my ears. She took a bite of the salmon, then another. Then she began eating normally, chatting about the decorations and the music. Melissa's eyes drifted back toward the table. She saw Linda eating. I saw the exact moment she realized something was wrong. Her body stiffened slightly. Her smile faltered. And for the first time that evening, her confident expression cracked. I felt a strange mixture of fear and grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Whatever Melissa had planned for me was no longer mine. But as Linda continued eating, I couldn't help wondering something that made my stomach twist. What exactly had Melissa put in that food? And what would happen when it started to work? For a while, nothing happened. The party continued like any other celebration. People returned to their conversations, laughter filled the room again, and someone turned the music up slightly as guests began lining up for dessert. If someone had walked into the hall at that moment, they would have thought everything was perfectly normal. But I wasn't relaxed. I kept glancing at Linda Carter. She seemed completely fine. She finished most of the salmon and rice chatting with another guest who had joined our table. She even laughed loudly at a joke someone made about retirement and golf. Across the room, Melissa was trying very hard to act normal, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't circulating around the room the way she had earlier. Instead, she lingered near the buffet table, pretending to organize plates while repeatedly glancing toward our table. Every few minutes, her eyes locked onto Linda. Then she would quickly look away again. My heart kept pounding harder with every passing minute. A small voice in the back of my mind whispered something unsettling. What if the thing Melissa had put in the food was actually dangerous? I hadn't thought about that fully when I switched the plates. At the time, I had been focused on protecting myself. Now the weight of that decision was starting to press down on me. Linda might have been asking invasive questions about my finances for months. She might have been working with Melissa, but she was still a human being. And she was still sitting right in front of me. I swallowed hard. "Linda," I said gently, "how are you feeling tonight?" She looked at me with mild surprise. "Wonderful," she said cheerfully. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," I said quickly. "Just checking." She laughed. "Well, I did have a little too much wine earlier, but I'm sure that'll pass." Her tone was light casual, but something about the way she rubbed her temple made my stomach twist again. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I began to wonder if maybe nothing would happen after all. Maybe Melissa had only added something harmless. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe. Linda suddenly blinked several times. Her fork clattered softly against the plate. You all right? Asked the guest sitting beside her. Linda frowned slightly. Yes, I think so. But her voice sounded different, slower. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. That's strange, she murmured. My chest tightened. What's strange? I asked carefully. She shook her head as if trying to clear it. I just feel a little dizzy. The guest beside her looked concerned. Do you want some water? Yes, please. The woman stood up and walked toward the beverage table. Linda leaned back in her chair. Her eyes seemed unfocused for a moment. Across the room, Melissa had gone completely still. Her eyes were locked on her mother now. Not on me, not on the table, only on Linda. And the look on her face was unmistakable. Panic. Linda blinked again, then rubbed her temples harder. This is odd, she muttered. Maybe you stood up too fast earlier, I suggested quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. But even as I spoke, I could see the change happening. Linda's posture had begun to slump slightly. Her normally confident expression looked confused. The guest returned with a glass of water. Here you go. Linda reached for it, but her hand missed the glass the first time. She tried again. This time she grabbed it, but her grip looked weak. Several people at nearby tables had begun noticing something was wrong. Is she okay? Someone whispered. Melissa suddenly rushed across the room. Mom, she said, sharply kneeling beside Linda's chair. Linda blinked up at her. I feel strange, she said slowly. What kind of strange? Melissa asked quickly. Lightheaded, maybe. Melissa's eyes darted toward me for a split second, then back to Linda. She probably just needs fresh air, Melissa said quickly, but the tension in her voice betrayed her. Daniel approached the table a moment later. What's going on? Melissa stood up abruptly. Mom just feels a little dizzy, she said. Linda tried to stand. The moment she pushed herself up from the chair, her legs wobbled. Daniel reached forward to steady her. Whoa, easy. I'm fine, Linda insisted, but she clearly wasn't. Her eyes looked glassy now. And when she tried to speak again, her words came out slightly slurred. I just need to sit. The room had grown noticeably quieter. Several coworkers were watching with concerned expressions. Someone whispered, Should we call an ambulance? Melissa turned quickly. No, she said a little too loudly. Then she forced a smile. I mean, it's probably nothing serious. But Linda suddenly grabbed the edge of the table. Her breathing had grown uneven. I don't feel right, she murmured. That was the moment I made my decision. I stood up. We should call medical help, I said firmly. Melissa looked at me sharply. There's no need to panic, she said. But Robert Jenkins, my longtime coworker and a retired police officer, had already stepped forward. I'm calling paramedics, he said, calmly pulling out his phone. Melissa's face went pale. Linda sank back into her chair. Her eyes looked unfocused now, drifting slightly. Daniel knelt beside her. Mom, stay with us, he said, clearly frightened. The room had shifted from celebration to alarm in a matter of seconds. Guests whispered nervously. Some stepped back to give space. Others hovered nearby, unsure what to do. Melissa stood frozen beside her mother. Her breathing had grown shallow, and I could see the exact moment a terrible realization hit her. The plan she had carefully prepared for someone else was now unfolding in front of dozens of witnesses. Just not the way she expected. As Robert spoke to emergency services on the phone, Linda's head tilted slightly to one side. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I feel confused. Melissa grabbed her arm. It's okay, Mom, she said quickly. But the words sounded hollow, because now everyone in the room could see it. Something was very wrong, and whatever had caused it had happened right here, at my retirement party. The room that had been full of laughter just minutes earlier now felt tense and quiet. Conversations had stopped completely. People stood in small clusters, whispering and watching Linda Carter struggle to stay upright in her chair. Daniel knelt beside her, gripping her arm gently. Mom, can you hear me? He asked. Linda blinked slowly. Her eyes looked unfocused, drifting around the room as if she couldn't quite understand where she was. I'm fine, she murmured, but she clearly wasn't. Her speech had become slower, almost slurred, and her movements were unsteady. Robert Jenkins stood a few feet away, still on the phone with emergency services. Yes, he said calmly. She's conscious but disoriented. Yes, about 68. Dizziness and confusion. We're at the Phoenix Community Event Hall. Melissa paced back and forth beside the table, wringing her hands. But the panic on her face wasn't just the panic of a worried daughter. It looked like something deeper, something closer to fear. Daniel looked up at me suddenly. What happened? He asked. His voice carried a sharp edge. I'm not sure, I replied carefully. That's strange, he said. She was fine a few minutes ago. Several guests nodded in agreement. One of my coworkers spoke quietly. She was eating just before this started. Daniel's eyes flicked to the table, to the plates, then back to Linda. Melissa moved quickly between them. She probably had too much wine, she said, forcing a small laugh. But nobody laughed with her. Linda's condition was clearly getting worse. She tried to lift her glass of water again, but nearly dropped it. Daniel caught the glass before it hit the floor. Easy, he said gently. I feel strange, Linda whispered again. Melissa grabbed her shoulders. You're okay, she insisted. But her voice sounded strained. The sound of a siren began to grow louder outside the hall. Relief washed over several guests. Paramedics are here, Robert said. 2 emergency responders entered the room moments later carrying medical bags. They moved quickly toward Linda. All right, let's give her some space, one of them said. The crowd stepped back. Daniel explained what had happened while the paramedics checked Linda's pulse and shined a small light into her eyes. How long has she been feeling dizzy, one of them asked. About 10 minutes, Daniel said. The paramedic nodded. Ma'am, can you tell me your name? Linda stared at him for a moment before answering slowly. Linda Carter. Good, he said. Do you know where you are? She hesitated, then shook her head weakly. That answer sent another ripple of worry through the room. The paramedics exchanged a glance. We're going to take her to the hospital to be safe, one of them said. Melissa stepped forward quickly. Is it serious, she asked. It could be a number of things, the paramedic replied. Low blood pressure medication, reaction dehydration. We'll know more after evaluation. Linda was carefully helped onto a stretcher. As they wheeled her toward the exit, Melissa followed closely beside them. Daniel turned toward me. His expression had changed. The pride and warmth from earlier in the evening were gone. Now his face looked tense. What happened tonight, he asked again. I blinked at him. I told you I'm not sure. He gestured toward the table. She was fine until she sat here. His eyes dropped to the plates again. I could see the suspicion forming behind them, and that realization sent a cold ripple through my chest. Melissa had spent months planting the idea that I was forgetful, confused, unstable. If something strange had happened at my own party, who would people believe? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This whole thing is weird, he muttered. Robert stepped forward calmly. Medical episodes can happen suddenly, he said. Daniel nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on me. Melissa suddenly reappeared at the doorway. They're taking Mom to St. Mary's, she said breathlessly. Daniel grabbed his jacket. I'll drive behind the ambulance. Melissa turned toward me then. Our eyes met across the room. For a split second, the mask slipped. The panic in her face wasn't just fear for her mother. It was something else, something darker. The look of someone realizing a plan had gone terribly wrong. Then her expression hardened. She was fine until she ate, Melissa said. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Melissa gestured toward the table again. She ate from this plate. My pulse quickened. Daniel turned slowly to look at me. You were sitting here, he said. Yes, I replied. And she started feeling sick right after. I suppose so. His jaw tightened. Mom, did something happen with the food? The accusation in his voice cut deeper than I expected. For a moment, I felt the old instinct rising, the one that told me to defend myself immediately. But I forced myself to stay calm. I ate from the same buffet everyone else did, I said evenly. Melissa crossed her arms. Maybe something got mixed up. Her eyes bored into mine. The implication was clear. Maybe I had done something. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I had caused this. A murmur spread through the nearby guests. Confusion. Doubt. Daniel looked torn. I'm not saying you did anything, he said carefully, but the damage was already done. Robert stepped forward again. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said firmly. Daniel nodded stiffly. I need to go to the hospital, he said. Melissa followed him toward the exit. But just before she stepped outside, she turned back one more time. Our eyes met again across the room, and this time there was no confusion in her expression. Only anger. Cold, sharp, focused directly at me, as if she already knew something terrible had happened to her plan, and she was trying to figure out exactly how. After Daniel and Melissa rushed out of the hall following the ambulance, the room slowly began to settle into an uneasy quiet. What had started as a celebration now felt like the aftermath of something people didn't quite understand. Guests stood around awkwardly whispering in small groups. A few people quietly picked up their coats. Others looked at me with sympathetic smiles, unsure what to say. One of the teachers from the district approached and squeezed my hand gently. "Are you all right, Susan?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach still felt tight. "I think so." She glanced toward the door where the ambulance had disappeared. "That was frightening." "Yes," I said softly. Frightening didn't begin to cover it. Because while everyone else in the room was confused, I had a terrible suspicion about what had actually happened. And the weight of that suspicion was sitting heavily on my chest. Robert Jenkins walked over and pulled out the chair beside me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Robert had been with the district almost as long as I had. Before working in administration, he had spent 20 years as a Phoenix police officer. He was the kind of man who noticed things most people missed. I leaned closer so the others couldn't hear us. "Robert," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something." His expression sharpened immediately. "What is it?" I took a slow breath. "I think Melissa put something in my food." Robert didn't react right away. He simply studied my face carefully. "Start from the beginning," he said calmly. So I told him. I described the moment I saw Melissa's hand above my plate, the quick movement, the way she watched my reaction afterward, and finally, the plate switch. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. "You're certain you saw her drop something in there?" he asked. "Yes." "And you switched plates with Linda?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That explains Melissa's reaction." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Robert glanced around the room to make sure no one was listening too closely. When Linda started getting sick, he said quietly, "Melissa didn't look like someone who was surprised." He paused. "She looked like someone who was watching a plan fall apart." A chill ran down my spine. "That's exactly what I thought," I whispered. Robert folded his arms. "Did anyone else see the plate switch?" "I don't think so." He looked toward the table where our plates still sat. "Good." "Good," I asked. He nodded. "If someone deliberately tampered with your food, we need to treat this carefully." The seriousness in his voice made my heart pound again. "What should I do?" For now, he said calmly, "Don't accuse anyone." I frowned slightly. "But if Melissa really—" "Let me finish," he said gently. He gestured toward the table. "That plate is still there." My eyes followed his. Sure enough, the half-finished meal still sat in front of Linda's chair. The plate that had originally been mine. "What are you thinking?" I asked. Robert leaned forward slightly. "If something was added to that food," he said, "it's possible there's still evidence." The word evidence made my stomach twist. "I don't want to cause a scandal," I said quietly. "You're not causing anything," Robert replied. "You're protecting yourself." He lowered his voice even further. "Think about it, Susan. Melissa has been planting the idea that you're forgetful for months." I stared at him. "How did you know that?" He gave a small smile. "You mentioned some of it before, and I've noticed the way she talks about you around others." That unsettled me even more. Robert continued. "If Linda's condition turns out to be related to something in that food, and if Melissa tries to shift the blame toward you—" He let the sentence hang. I suddenly understood exactly what he meant. If Melissa succeeded in making people believe I had somehow caused this incident, it would reinforce the narrative she had been building, that I was unstable, careless, not fully capable of managing my life. My chest tightened. "What do we do?" I asked again. Robert stood up slowly. First, he said we secure that plate. He walked toward the table casually, like he was simply cleaning up after the party. He picked up the plate and examined it briefly. Then he returned with it. "I'm going to wrap this and keep it separate," he said quietly. "Is that legal?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "We're not accusing anyone yet. We're just preserving something that might become important later." I nodded slowly. It made sense. One of the catering staff approached the table. "Should we start clearing things away?" she asked. Robert answered quickly. "Give us a few minutes." The woman nodded and moved on. Robert carefully slid the plate into a large plastic container that had been used earlier for leftovers. He sealed the lid. "There," he said. My hands trembled slightly. "I can't believe this is happening." Robert placed the container inside a cooler near the buffet table. Then he returned to sit beside me again. "How long have you suspected Melissa?" he asked. I hesitated. "A few months." So I told him everything. The questions about my finances, the comments about my memory, the phone call I had overheard. "We just need one clean incident." Robert's expression darkened. "That phrase bothers me," he said. "It bothers me too." He leaned back, thinking. "If someone wanted to make it appear that you were mentally unstable—" He paused. They might try to create a situation where you behaved strangely or made a serious mistake. My mind started racing, like poisoning someone at your own retirement party. The idea hit me like a physical blow. That's what this was supposed to be, I whispered. Robert nodded slowly. It's possible. The room around us had grown much quieter now as more guests began leaving. The celebration was clearly over. I rubbed my hands together nervously. What happens next? Robert checked his watch. We wait. For what? For information from the hospital. I nodded slowly. Because somewhere across the city, Linda Carter was now being examined by doctors. And sooner or later, someone was going to ask a very important question. What had caused her condition? And when that question was finally answered, everything about that night could change. By the time the last guests left the community hall, the celebration that had started as one of the happiest nights of my life had turned into something else entirely. The decorations still hung from the ceiling. The banner congratulating me on 38 years of service still stretched across the wall. But the mood in the room had shifted. What remained wasn't joy. It was uncertainty. A few coworkers stayed behind to help clean up the tables. Others gave me gentle hugs before leaving, whispering things like, I hope everything turns out all right, or please keep us updated. I thanked them all, though my mind was somewhere else. Across the room, Robert Jenkins stood near the cooler where he had stored the plate from Linda's meal. He looked deep in thought. Eventually, the hall was almost empty. Just the two of us remained along with a couple of staff members folding chairs in the far corner. I walked over to him. Have you heard anything I asked? Robert shook his head. Not yet. He crossed his arms and looked toward the door. It's only been about an hour. Hospitals move slowly. I nodded. Still, the waiting felt unbearable. Because the more I thought about the situation, the more unsettling it became. If Melissa had really put something in my food, then tonight had not been an accident. It had been a plan that had failed. Robert seemed to be thinking along the same lines. Tell me again, he said quietly, what Melissa said during that phone call you overheard. I repeated the words slowly. We just need one clean incident. He frowned. That sounds deliberate. It does. And you said she's been talking about your memory slipping. Yes, he nodded. And asking about your finances. Yes. Robert leaned against the table, his voice growing more serious. Then we need to consider something. What? If someone wanted control over your finances, one of the easiest legal ways to do it would be to argue that you're mentally incapable of managing them. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. You mean guardianship, he said. I swallowed hard. I had heard the term before. In legal situations, guardianship allowed someone to take control of another person's financial and personal decisions if they were deemed mentally incapable. Bank accounts, property, medical decisions, everything. But they can't just claim that I said. Robert shook his head. No, they would need evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that you're confused, forgetful, unable to manage your affairs. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Suddenly, all of Melissa's comments over the past months began lining up in a terrifying pattern. Her remarks about my memory, her questions about my finances, her suggestions that I might need help managing things, and the phrase she had repeated several times, *planning ahead. What if I said slowly they were trying to create that evidence? Robert looked at me carefully. That's exactly what I'm thinking. I felt my heart start pounding again. Imagine what it would look like, he continued. You host a retirement party. Something happens with the food. Someone gets sick. He paused. And witnesses say you are acting strange or confused. The picture forming in my mind made my chest tighten. That could make it look like I caused it, I whispered. Robert nodded. Exactly. My hands trembled slightly. That's why Melissa watched me so closely after she touched the plate. Robert raised an eyebrow. She wanted to see if you'd eat it. And if I had, I said quietly. He finished the thought. You might have started acting disoriented in front of dozens of witnesses. The room suddenly felt colder. Because the more we discussed it, the clearer the pattern became. If I had eaten that food and begun showing symptoms, confusion, dizziness, disorientation, it would have happened in front of a room full of people. People who had just heard Melissa talk about my age and retirement. People who might easily believe that something was wrong with me. And if someone had suggested that I had accidentally caused Linda's illness, that could have been the clean incident Melissa mentioned. The moment that made everyone start questioning my mental stability. But instead, Linda had eaten the food. Robert suddenly stood up straight. Let's think about this logically, he said. What do you mean? If Melissa expected you to eat that plate, he said, then the substance, she added, probably wasn't something immediately dangerous. My stomach tightened. Why? Because if you had collapsed or needed an ambulance right away, it would have caused a criminal investigation. I nodded slowly. That would draw attention. Exactly. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So whatever she used was probably something designed to cause temporary confusion or dizziness, something that could make me look disoriented, forgetful, unstable. The exact image she had been hinting at for months. My heart sank. She wanted everyone to see me lose control. Robert nodded. That's my guess. The silence that followed felt heavy. Then my phone buzzed in my purse. The sound made me jump. I pulled it out quickly. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. My heart began racing. I answered immediately. Daniel. His voice sounded tense. We're at the hospital. How is Linda? There was a pause. The doctors are still running tests, he said. Is she conscious? Yes. Relief washed through me briefly. But then Daniel added something that made my stomach twist. The doctors asked what she ate tonight. I held my breath, and I asked carefully. Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that told me this situation was about to become even more complicated. Melissa told them she ate from your plate. The words hung in the air. Across the hall, Robert watched my face carefully as I lowered the phone, because now the narrative had begun, and if Melissa had her way, I might soon be the one everyone blamed. When Daniel said those words, asterisk, Melissa told them she ate from your plate, asterisk, I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. For a moment, I didn't speak. Across the hall, Robert was watching my face closely, trying to read my reaction. On the phone, Daniel continued. The doctor asked if there could have been something wrong with the food, he said. I took a slow breath. Well, I replied carefully, everyone ate from the same buffet. Yeah, Daniel said. That's what I told them too. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice lowered slightly. But Melissa said something strange. My grip tightened on the phone. What did she say? She told the doctor that Linda ate from your plate by accident. The words landed heavily. I glanced at Robert. He raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, I said slowly. Yeah, Daniel replied. Melissa said you might have mixed up the plates. My stomach twisted. There it was, the story, carefully planted. A simple explanation that would make everything look like a mistake caused by confusion. A confused older woman mixing up plates at her own party. The kind of clean incident that could easily spread through a room full of witnesses. Daniel, I said calmly, did Melissa tell them I switched the plates? No, he said. She just said things got mixed up. Robert silently mouthed 2 words to me. Asterisk, stay calm. I nodded slightly. Listen, Daniel continued. The doctor said Linda's symptoms look like some kind of mild sedative reaction. My pulse quickened. Sedative, I asked. That's what they think so far, he said. They're still running tests. I closed my eyes briefly. Melissa had likely chosen something that wouldn't kill anyone. Just something strong enough to cause confusion. Disorientation. Exactly the symptoms that could make someone appear mentally unstable. And if that person happened to be me, I forced my voice to remain steady. How is Linda now? She's awake, Daniel said, still a little confused, but improving. Good. Another pause. Then Daniel asked quietly, Mom, did anything strange happen tonight? The question carried more weight than the words themselves. He was searching for something. Maybe reassurance? Maybe confirmation of Melissa's version. I chose my words carefully. Daniel, I said gently, I didn't do anything to harm Linda. I didn't say you did, but you're wondering. He sighed. I just want to understand what happened. So do I. After a few more updates about the hospital, we ended the call. I lowered the phone slowly. Robert walked closer. Let me guess, he said. They're already suggesting I mixed up the plates. He nodded grimly. That was fast. And the doctors think Linda had a sedative. Robert crossed his arms. That lines up with our theory. I rubbed my temples. So what do we do now? He glanced toward the cooler where the plate was stored. We stay ahead of the story. How? You talk to a lawyer. The word lawyer made my stomach tighten again. Is it really that serious? Robert met my eyes. If Melissa pushes the narrative that you caused this incident intentionally or accidentally, it could damage your reputation. He paused. And if she's really building a case that you're mentally unstable, this could be used against you. The thought made my chest feel tight. After 38 years of careful work, one manipulated situation could suddenly cast doubt on everything. I can't let that happen, I said quietly. You won't, Robert replied. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. Her name is Karen Whitmore. I looked at the card. Asterisk, asterisk, Karen Whitmore, estate and elder law attorney, asterisk, asterisk. I've worked with her before, Robert explained. She's one of the best in Phoenix when it comes to cases involving guardianship or financial control disputes. Guardianship. The word echoed ominously in my mind. What should I tell her? The truth, Robert said, everything. I nodded slowly. The situation was beginning to crystallize in my mind. Melissa had likely spent months laying the groundwork, planting subtle doubts, building a story that suggested I might not be fully capable of managing my life. And tonight had probably been meant to provide the final piece of evidence. A public incident, witnesses, confusion. But instead, the plan had backfired. Now the question was whether Melissa would double down on her story, or retreat and try something else. Robert walked over to the cooler and lifted the lid briefly, checking that the plate container was still inside. "We're keeping this safe," he said. I nodded. "Tomorrow morning," he continued, "you call Karen Whitmore. And until then, don't confront Melissa." That surprised me. Why not? Because if she realizes, what she tried to do, she'll start covering her tracks. I thought about that. It made sense. Melissa had always been careful, strategic. If she believed her plan had simply gone wrong, she might still reveal more. Robert closed the cooler and turned back toward me. "Tonight was supposed to make you look unstable," he said quietly. "But instead it might expose something much bigger." I exhaled slowly. I never imagined my retirement party would end like this. He gave a sympathetic smile. Life has strange timing sometimes. Outside the hall, the Phoenix night had grown quiet. The celebration lights still glowed softly through the windows, illuminating the empty tables. I looked around the room where I had expected to celebrate the beginning of a peaceful new chapter. Instead, I now realized something unsettling. My retirement had only just begun, and already, someone close to me had tried to take control of it. But one thing had changed. Earlier that evening, Melissa believed she had the advantage. Now, I was starting to see the full shape of her plan, and this time I wasn't going to let it happen. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For a moment, I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why my chest felt so heavy. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back. The party, Melissa's hand over my plate, Linda collapsing, Daniel's phone call from the hospital. The quiet tension that had replaced what was supposed to be a celebration of my life's work. I sat up slowly. Outside my bedroom window, the Arizona sun had just begun rising, casting warm light across the quiet neighborhood. Normally, mornings like this felt peaceful. But that morning, my mind was already racing. On my nightstand sat the business card Robert had given me. Asterisk, asterisk, Karen Whitmore, estate and elder law attorney. Asterisk, asterisk. I picked it up and studied it for a moment. Calling a lawyer felt like crossing a line. But the more I thought about what Robert had said the night before, the more I realized something important. If Melissa was truly trying to build a case that I was mentally unstable, then silence would only help her. I got dressed, made a cup of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the card. At exactly 9:00 a.m., I dialed the number. A receptionist answered. "Whitmore Legal Group. How may I help you?" "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Susan Garcia. I was given Miss Whitmore's name by Robert Jenkins." There was a brief pause. "Oh yes, Mr. Jenkins has worked with us before. One moment, please." A few seconds later, a calm, professional voice came onto the line. "This is Karen Whitmore." "Good morning," I said. "My name is Susan Garcia. Robert suggested I speak with you." "Of course," she replied. "How can I help?" I hesitated briefly. Then I told her everything. I described Melissa's questions about my finances, her comments about my memory, the phone call I had overheard, the incident at the retirement party, and finally the plate switch. Karen didn't interrupt once. She simply listened. When I finished, she spoke slowly. "Mrs. Garcia, I'm very glad you called." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because what you've described raises some serious concerns. About the food incident." "Yes," she said, "but also about something else." "What?" "The pattern of behavior leading up to it." I leaned back in my chair. "Do you mean the comments Melissa made about my memory?" "Exactly." Karen's voice remained calm, but there was a sharp clarity behind her words. In elder law, one of the most common legal strategies used to gain control over someone's finances is to petition for guardianship. The word landed heavily. That's what Robert mentioned. Karen continued. To obtain guardianship, someone must convince a court that the person is incapable of managing their own affairs, and they would need evidence. Correct. I rubbed my forehead slowly. Evidence like public incidents where the person appears confused or unstable. Precisely. A silence fell between us, because both of us were now thinking the same thing. The retirement party. That could have been the incident, I said quietly. It's possible, Karen replied, especially if there were witnesses. There were dozens. And if someone had already been telling people you were becoming forgetful. I closed my eyes briefly. Melissa had been doing exactly that. Karen spoke again. Mrs. Garcia, has your daughter-in-law ever suggested you sign documents giving her access to your finances? Yes. How recently? Within the last couple of months. And did she mention power of attorney? Yes. Karen exhaled softly. That fits the pattern. My chest tightened again. So what do I do now? The most important thing she said is to protect your legal independence. How? First, I would like to meet with you in person. That's fine. Second, she continued, we will review your financial documents and ensure no one else has access to your accounts. I already manage everything myself. Good. Third, she said carefully, we need to prepare in case someone attempts to file a guardianship petition against you. My heart skipped a beat. You really think Melissa might try that? Karen paused before answering. I don't know her intentions, she said. But the behaviors you described are consistent with situations I've seen before. That sentence made the situation feel far more real. After we scheduled a meeting for later that afternoon, I ended the call and sat quietly at the kitchen table. The house felt strangely silent. For years, I had imagined retirement mornings like this, calm, peaceful, free from work deadlines. Instead, I was preparing to defend my independence from someone in my own family. My phone buzzed suddenly. Daniel, I answered. Hello. Mom, he said quickly. Linda's being released from the hospital today. That's good news. Yeah. His voice sounded tired. The doctors said it was likely some kind of sedative. My stomach tightened again. Did they say where it came from? They're not sure yet, he said. But Melissa told them it must have been something accidental. I could almost hear her voice in my mind, carefully shaping the narrative, making it sound like a harmless mix-up. Daniel continued. Yeah, she said maybe someone mixed up medications or something. I took a slow breath. Daniel, I said gently. I didn't do anything that could have caused that. I know he replied quickly, but something in his voice told me he wasn't entirely sure what to believe. Before hanging up, he added something that made my chest tighten. Melissa said people at the party saw you acting strange. I froze. Strange how? She said you looked confused about the plates. The story was already spreading. Melissa wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long moment. Then I stood up and walked toward the window. The sun was fully up now. Birds chirped in the trees across the street. The world looked peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, something serious was unfolding. Melissa had begun shaping a story that painted me as confused, unstable, dangerous. But she had made one mistake. She believed I didn't understand what she was doing. And thanks to Robert, thanks to Karen Whitmore, and thanks to one small plate sitting inside a cooler from last night, that story was about to face a very different ending. That afternoon, I drove across Phoenix to Karen Whitmore's office. The city traffic moved slowly under the bright Arizona sun, but my mind was moving even faster. Every red light gave me another moment to think about what Melissa had already started doing. She was telling people I looked confused. She was suggesting I had mixed up the plates. She was quietly planting the idea that the incident at my retirement party had been my fault. And if she kept repeating that story long enough, some people might start believing it. Karen Whitmore's office sat on the third floor of a professional building downtown. The lobby was quiet and smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me warmly. Mrs. Garcia, Miss Whitmore is ready for you. Karen stood up from behind her desk when I entered the office. She was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a calm confidence that made me feel immediately more at ease. Susan, she said, offering her hand, I'm glad you came in. Thank you for seeing me so quickly. Of course. She gestured toward a chair across from her desk. Let's talk. For the next hour, we went through everything carefully. Karen asked detailed questions about my finances, about my will, about my retirement benefits, about every interaction I could remember with Melissa over the past year. I answered as honestly as I could. When I finished describing the events of the retirement party again, Karen leaned back in her chair. "You did something very important," she said. "What's that?" "You didn't confront her." I blinked. "Why does that matter?" "Because if Melissa doesn't know you saw her tamper with the food, she'll continue behaving normally." Karen folded her hands on the desk. "And when people think they're safe, they often reveal more than they intend." That made sense. Robert had said something similar the night before. Karen then opened a folder and began writing notes. Now she said, "Let's talk about protecting you." "Okay." First, she said, "We're going to update several legal documents, such as your financial power of attorney." I frowned slightly. I thought power of attorney was something people gave to others. "It is," she said. "But right now, we're doing the opposite." "The opposite?" "We're creating documentation that clearly states no one has authority to make financial decisions on your behalf unless you explicitly grant it." I nodded slowly. "That sounds wise." "Second," she continued, "we will document the events of the retirement party in detail." "For what purpose?" "In case someone attempts to use that incident as evidence of mental instability." My stomach tightened again. "You really think Melissa might try that?" Karen looked at me carefully. "I've seen similar cases before." That answer was enough. She continued writing. "Third, we need to secure your financial accounts. They're already under my control." "Good," she said. "But we should also notify your bank that no one else is authorized to access your accounts without your direct approval." I nodded. That step felt practical. Karen paused before speaking again. "Robert mentioned that you preserved the plate from the party." "Yes." "Excellent." Her tone carried a hint of approval. That could become important evidence. "Evidence of what?" "That someone intentionally placed a substance in your food." My pulse quickened. "Do you think we should have it tested?" Karen nodded. "Yes, through a private laboratory. Preferably?" She leaned forward slightly. "If the test confirms the presence of a sedative that would strongly support your account of events." I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that someone believed me. Anxiety about what the results might reveal. Karen closed her folder. "There's one more thing we should discuss." "What's that?" "The possibility that Melissa may already be preparing a guardianship petition." The words made my stomach drop. "Can she do that?" "Anyone can file a petition," Karen said calmly. "But winning one is much harder." "How so?" "A court requires medical evaluations and substantial evidence." I exhaled slowly. "So the retirement party might have been intended to provide that evidence." Karen nodded. "It would create witnesses and a story." "Yes." I stared at the desk for a moment. Melissa had been thinking several steps ahead, but so were we now. Karen suddenly asked another question. "Has Melissa ever attempted to access your financial accounts?" "No." "Has she ever asked you to sign legal documents?" "Only casually. She suggested I might want help managing things." Karen wrote something down. "That's important." She then leaned back again. "Now let's talk strategy." "Strategy. For the next few weeks, you should behave exactly as you always have." I frowned slightly. "You mean act normal?" "Exactly. Don't accuse Melissa. Don't argue. Don't confront." "Why?" Karen smiled slightly. "Because if she believes her story is working, she may make mistakes." I understood. Sometimes the best way to expose a lie was to let the liar keep talking. Karen stood up and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Phoenix. "When someone believes they're winning," she said quietly, "they become careless." She turned back to me. "And careless people reveal their true intentions." I nodded slowly. "So we wait." "Yes, and we prepare." As our meeting ended, Karen handed me a folder containing updated legal paperwork. "Sign these when you get home," she said. "I will." "And Susan," she added gently. "Yes, you've spent decades managing complex financial systems." "That's true. This situation," she said, "is just another problem that requires careful thinking." Her confidence steadied me. I stood up and shook her hand. "Thank you." As I walked back to my car, the afternoon sun was beginning to soften. Phoenix traffic hummed around me, but my mind was clear now. Melissa had started a game, a very calculated one, but she had made one mistake. She believed I was an easy target. She believed I was too trusting, too slow, too old to notice what she was doing. And thanks to that belief, she hadn't noticed the moment her plan had already begun to fall apart. 2 days after my meeting with Karen Whitmore, the situation finally escalated. Until then, everything had been quiet on the surface. Daniel had called once to tell me Linda was recovering well and had been discharged from the hospital. He sounded tired but polite, as if trying to keep the peace between everyone involved. Melissa, however, had not contacted me directly, but that didn't mean she was silent. Robert called me that morning around 10. "Susan," he said, "I heard something you need to know." My stomach tightened immediately. "What is it?" "I ran into one of the district administrators who attended your retirement party," he said. "Apparently, Melissa has been talking." I closed my eyes briefly. "What is she saying?" "She's telling people that you looked confused that night, that you might have mixed up the plates." Exactly the narrative we expected. "And she says Linda got sick because the plates were accidentally switched." I exhaled slowly. The story was spreading, but Robert added something else. "There's more." "What?" "Melissa told someone she's worried about your mental state." The words felt like a punch to the chest. "She's saying your retirement may be affecting you." I gripped the phone tighter. "She's setting the stage," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it sounds like." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table thinking carefully. Karen had warned me this might happen. Melissa was slowly building a narrative, a story in which I appeared unstable, confused, incapable. But that same afternoon, something happened that pushed the situation into a completely different territory. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. His voice sounded tense. "Mom, we need to talk." My pulse quickened. "What's wrong?" "Melissa spoke to a lawyer today." That sentence made the room feel suddenly colder. "What kind of lawyer?" I asked quietly. "A family lawyer." I already knew where this was heading, and Daniel hesitated. Then he said the words Karen had warned me about. "She's considering filing for guardianship." For a moment, I didn't speak. The reality of it landed slowly but heavily. Melissa wasn't just spreading rumors. She was preparing legal action. "Daniel," I said carefully, "do you understand what that means?" He sighed. "She says she's worried about you." "Worried about me?" "Yes." I took a slow breath. "Did she tell you why she thinks I need a guardian?" "She said the retirement party showed signs of confusion." "Of course it did, because she had designed it that way." "Daniel," I said gently, "do you believe that—" He hesitated. "I don't know what to believe right now." That answer hurt more than I expected. "I've managed my life and my finances for decades," I said. "I know." "Does that sound like someone who can't take care of themselves?" "No." "But Melissa keeps saying—" He stopped mid-sentence. "What does she keep saying?" I asked. "That you've been forgetting things." The same story again. Repeated, reinforced. I could almost hear Karen's voice in my head. "She's building a case." I spoke carefully. "Daniel, I need you to think about something." "What?" "If Melissa truly believed I was losing my mental capacity?" "Yes. Why would she wait until now to bring it up?" He didn't answer immediately. "Mom, I'm not accusing you of anything." "I know. But this whole situation is complicated." Yes, it was complicated. But one fact remained very simple. Someone had put something into my food, and the only person who had the opportunity to do that was Melissa. Before we ended the call, Daniel added something else. "There might be a meeting soon." "What kind of meeting?" "With lawyers." I nodded slowly even though he couldn't see me. "All right." After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long moment. Then I reached for my phone and called Karen Whitmore. She answered almost immediately. "Susan, I just heard from Daniel. And Melissa is preparing a guardianship petition." Karen didn't sound surprised. "That was faster than I expected, but not unusual. What do we do?" Karen's voice remained calm and precise. "We respond." "How?" "First, we gather evidence of your competence. I can provide financial records." "Good." "Second, we document the food incident and the plate we saved." "Yes," she said, "we'll have it tested immediately." I felt a small sense of relief, because now the truth might finally surface. But Karen added something else. "There's another important factor." "What?" "Witnesses." "From the party." "Yes. If Melissa is telling people you looked confused, we need witnesses who can testify that you were behaving normally." That made sense. "I can contact several coworkers," I said. "Good." Karen paused briefly. "Now there's one more question we need to address." "What's that?" "Your son." I felt my chest tighten. "What about him? Which side will he take?" That question weighed heavily, because Daniel stood exactly in the middle of this situation, between his wife and his mother. "I don't know," I admitted. Karen's voice softened slightly. "Then we prepare for both possibilities." After I ended the call, I stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the quiet street. 2 children rode bicycles down the sidewalk. A neighbor watered her garden. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But inside my home, a storm was forming. Melissa believed she was winning. She believed her narrative was strong enough. She believed the retirement party had given her the evidence she needed. But she didn't know about the plate in Robert's cooler. She didn't know about Karen Whitmore. And she definitely didn't know that the next step in her plan was about to expose everything. 3 days after Daniel told me Melissa was considering a guardianship petition, Karen Whitmore called with the news we had been waiting for. I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing bank statements when my phone rang. Susan Karen said calmly, "The laboratory results just came back." My heart began beating faster. And I asked. There was a substance in the food sample. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of substance? A sedative. The room felt very quiet. Karen continued. It's a prescription-grade sedative that can cause dizziness, confusion, and temporary cognitive impairment. Exactly the symptoms Melissa had been describing to people. Exactly the symptoms that could make someone appear mentally unstable. I closed my eyes briefly. So it wasn't an accident. No, Karen said. Someone deliberately added that substance. My chest tightened. And Linda experienced the effects because she ate the food instead of me. That appears to be the case. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since the retirement party, the truth had real, tangible support. Evidence. Karen, I said quietly, what does this mean legally? It changes everything. How so? Because now this situation is no longer just about rumors or family disputes. She paused. It may involve criminal behavior. The words hung heavily in the air. Criminal behavior, I repeated. Yes, someone tampered with your food, and the intent appears to have been to impair you mentally in front of witnesses. I swallowed slowly. Karen continued, we are preparing a report documenting the laboratory findings. Will Melissa see it? Yes. And the court will see it as well if she files a guardianship petition. That realization sent a ripple of satisfaction through my chest, because Melissa had believed the retirement party would become the foundation of her case. Instead, it was about to become the thing that destroyed it. Later that afternoon, Karen and I met again at her office. She handed me a printed copy of the lab results. The document clearly listed the substance and its effects. Dizziness, confusion, memory disruption, exactly what Melissa had been describing when she spoke about my supposed mental decline. Karen looked at me carefully. There's another important development. What is it? Melissa's lawyer contacted our office. My eyebrows lifted slightly. That was quick. Yes, they wanted to discuss the incident at the retirement party. And Karen leaned forward slightly. I informed them that we have laboratory evidence confirming a sedative was placed in your food. What did they say? They were surprised. I couldn't help letting out a small breath of relief. Melissa had been so confident, so certain she controlled the narrative. Now that narrative was collapsing. Karen continued. They asked whether you were planning to file a police report. I thought about that. Part of me wanted to. Someone had tampered with my food. Someone had tried to manipulate my reputation and independence. But another part of me felt the weight of what that would mean. This wasn't just a stranger. This was my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter's mother. Karen seemed to sense my hesitation. You don't have to decide that today, she said gently. What matters right now is that you are protected. I nodded slowly. And Melissa, she will likely abandon the guardianship petition. Why? Because the evidence now suggests the retirement party incident was orchestrated. Karen folded her hands. And that makes her position extremely weak. That evening, Daniel called again. His voice sounded strained. Mom, Melissa told me about the lab test. She did. Yes. And he hesitated. She says she doesn't understand how the sedative got there. Of course she didn't. I see, I said calmly. Daniel exhaled slowly. The lawyer told us it looks bad. I remained silent, because the truth was, it did look bad, very bad. After a moment, Daniel spoke again. Mom, did you really see Melissa touch your plate? The question hung in the air. Yes, I said quietly. There was a long silence. When Daniel spoke again, his voice sounded different, less defensive, more uncertain. I don't know what to think anymore. I understand, I said gently. Because I did. He loved his wife. But the facts were beginning to paint a very different picture. Before ending the call, he said something else. Melissa's mother is furious. That's understandable. She says this whole situation is a misunderstanding. Maybe, but misunderstandings don't usually involve sedatives in someone's dinner. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room. The sun was setting outside the window, casting long golden shadows across the floor. For weeks, Melissa had been building a careful narrative. A story where I appeared confused, forgetful, unstable. But now the truth was beginning to surface. And once the truth appears, it has a way of unraveling everything else. The retirement party that Melissa had hoped would prove my weakness had instead revealed something far more serious. And for the first time since this situation began, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Melissa's plan had failed. The week after the laboratory results came back felt strangely quiet. For months, Melissa had been steadily pushing toward a moment where she could question my independence. Every comment about my memory, every suggestion that I needed help managing my life, every small doubt she planted had been building towards something. The retirement party had been supposed to be the final piece. Instead, it had exposed the entire plan, and now suddenly there was silence. Melissa stopped talking about guardianship. The rumors she had quietly spread about my supposed confusion faded almost as quickly as they had appeared. Daniel called me one evening, his voice sounding exhausted. "Mom, Melissa's lawyer says they're not moving forward with the guardianship petition." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the living room window. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. "I expected that," I said calmly. Daniel hesitated. "Mom, about what happened?" I waited. "I've been thinking a lot about it," he said quietly, "and the more I look at everything, the less sense Melissa's explanation makes." I didn't answer immediately, because this was something Daniel had to reach on his own. He continued. "She said someone must have mixed up medications or something at the buffet. That's what she told you. But the lab results show the sedative was in your plate." "Yes. And the only person who touched that plate before you sat down was—" His voice trailed off. I knew the conclusion forming in his mind. "I don't want to believe she would do something like that," he said. "I understand." He sighed heavily. "But I also know you're not confused, Mom." Hearing that lifted a weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. "Thank you," I said gently. There was another pause before he spoke again. "Melissa is staying with her mother for a while." "I see. She says she needs space." I didn't respond, because the truth was the space between us had been growing for months already. Before we hung up, Daniel said something else. "I'm sorry I doubted you." The words were quiet but sincere. "I know this has been difficult for you too," I said. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room. The house felt peaceful again. For the first time since the retirement party, the tension that had filled my thoughts began to ease. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Karen Whitmore finalized the legal documents protecting my finances and independence. My bank confirmed that no one else had access to my accounts. The laboratory report remained safely filed with my lawyer in case it was ever needed again. Robert Jenkins checked in regularly, making sure I was doing all right. "You handled this better than most people would," he told me one afternoon over coffee. "I just trusted my instincts," I said. "And those instincts probably saved you." He was right. If I had ignored that small moment at the party, if I'd eaten the food without noticing, the entire story might have unfolded very differently. Witnesses would have seen me become confused. Melissa would have pointed to that moment as proof that something was wrong with me, and a court might have been asked to decide whether I could still manage my own life. But that's not what happened, because sometimes the smallest decisions change everything. About a month later, Daniel came by my house with Emily. My granddaughter ran inside the moment she saw me. "Grandma." She wrapped her arms around my waist and I hugged her tightly. Moments like that reminded me what truly mattered. Daniel stood in the doorway watching us. He looked older somehow, like the past few weeks had forced him to confront things he hadn't wanted to see before. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said quietly. "About Melissa?" "Yes." I nodded. "You don't have to decide everything right away," I told him. "I know." He glanced around the house. "You've always taken care of everything yourself." "That's true, and I should have trusted that." I smiled gently. "Sometimes people have to learn things the hard way." Emily tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, can we bake cookies?" I laughed. "Of course we can." Daniel watched us for a moment before speaking again. "I want to rebuild things between us," he said. "I'd like that, because despite everything that had happened, Daniel was still my son. And families, even broken ones, sometimes find ways to heal. Later that evening, after Daniel and Emily left, I sat on the back porch watching the stars appear above the Arizona sky. Retirement had not begun the way I imagined. Instead of quiet relaxation, the first weeks had brought conflict, betrayal, and a legal battle for my independence. but something important had come out of it. Clarity. I understood now how easily trust could be manipulated, how quietly someone could try to take control of another person's life, and how important it was to pay attention when something didn't feel right. Because intuition, especially when it comes from years of experience, is rarely wrong. The night of my retirement party had almost become the beginning of my downfall. Instead, it became the moment I realized something powerful. No one gets to decide my life for me. Not my daughter-in-law, not a court, not anyone. After 38 years of managing school budgets, raising a son, and building a stable life, I knew exactly who I was. And I wasn't about to let anyone rewrite that story. Sometimes the greatest threats we face don't come from strangers. They come from people who sit at our own dinner table, people we trust, people who know our routines, our weaknesses, and the quiet details of our lives. That's what makes betrayal inside a family so painful. But stories like this carry an important lesson. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, pay attention to that feeling. Too often we dismiss our intuition because we don't want to believe someone close to us could be acting with bad intentions. But awareness is not paranoia. It is protection. Another lesson is this: independence matters. As we grow older, society sometimes assumes we should quietly hand over control of our decisions to others. But independence doesn't disappear with age. Experience, wisdom, and decades of responsibility don't suddenly vanish just because someone retires. Protecting your voice, your choices, and your financial security is one of the most important things anyone can do. And finally, remember this: truth has a way of surfacing. Even when someone carefully constructs a story, even when rumors spread and doubt grows, facts eventually find their way into the light. In my case, it was one small decision, switching a plate, that changed the entire outcome. If you were in my position that night, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Melissa right away? Would you have switched the plate like I did? Or would you have handled it differently? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. And if stories like this interest you, real-life drama, difficult choices, and the strength it takes to stand up for yourself, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening to my story.